The thing nobody tells you about being captured by an alien military force is how ordinary it feels at first. You'd think there'd be more drama, more screaming, more of whatever the galactic equivalent of trumpets and conquest music is. But no. One moment I was crawling through a collapsed maintenance corridor 200 meters beneath the Selenian salt flats. The next I had 4 Kethvor soldiers standing over me with their plasma lances pointed at my chest, and that flat, gray expression they all wear, the one that makes them look like they're deciding what to order for lunch. No fanfare, no speech. One of them just said something into a comm unit, and then they zip-tied my wrists with a polymer brace so tight I lost feeling in my left hand inside of 10 minutes. That was day 1. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something before we get into the meat of it. I want you to understand that when I say the people who planned my imprisonment made a huge mistake, I'm not being dramatic. I'm not the type to exaggerate things. Ask anyone in my detachment. Ask Lieutenant Harrow. Ask Chen, who watched me eat a ration brick cold for 3 weeks without complaining once. I'm a practical person. I deal in facts and observable reality. The observable reality is this. Whoever looked at the prisoner manifest and decided to put me in cell block 12, Unit D, the one they called the Quiet Wing, clearly had no idea what they were doing. Or maybe they knew exactly what they were doing and just underestimated both of us. Either way, they made a mistake. Let me back up. The Kethvor prison installation on Selenite 4 was, I guess, since most of it is rubble now, one of the more unusual military detention facilities in the outer compact. It was carved into the rock underneath the salt flats, which meant the whole place had this permanent damp chill to it, like a wine cellar the size of a city block. The walls sweated. The lights were these low amber strips that ran along the floor instead of the ceiling, which gave everything this weird upward shadow effect. Made everyone look a little monstrous. Made me look a little monstrous, probably. I was processed through intake the usual way. They catalogued my gear, took blood and a tissue sample, standard for species identification under the compact, and a Kethvor functionary with a flat, reedy voice read me my status. Detained enemy combatant. Coalition alignment confirmed. To be held pending intelligence review. I asked how long. The functionary looked at me the way people look at a question they've decided not to answer. They put me in a holding cell for about 8 hours. White walls. A slab of something that was supposed to be a sleeping surface. A water dispenser that tasted like recycled coolant. I sat there and I thought about Chen and Harrow and the rest of 3rd Detachment, and I wondered if they'd gotten out. And then I stopped thinking about that because it was the kind of thinking that would hollow you out if you let it. On the 2nd day, they moved me. I heard cell block 12 before I saw it. We were walking me, 2 Kethvor guards, a processing drone humming along at knee height, through a series of corridors that kept getting narrower and lower. The amber lights were fewer here. The walls were raw rock in places, the carved-out installations giving way to natural geology. You could smell the salt and something else underneath it, something that reminded me of ozone and old copper. And then there was a sound. Low, resonant. Not quite music and not quite machinery. It moved through the walls like it was coming from inside the stone itself. I felt it in my back teeth more than I heard it with my ears. One of the guards glanced at the other. A small look, quick, the kind you make when you're pretending you didn't just react to something. I filed that away. The processing drone checked us through a sealed door, palm scanner, retinal, and a secondary atmospheric lock that hissed open with a sound like something exhaling. And then we were in the Quiet Wing. It didn't look like the other cell blocks. The cells here were larger, separated by more space. The doors were thicker, not just reinforced but layered composite materials I didn't recognize stacked in cross-hatched panels that looked like they could stop something considerably more energetic than a person. Each cell had an outer access corridor with its own secondary locking mechanism. Maximum isolation architecture, I realized. The kind of setup you use when you're less worried about the prisoners talking to each other and more worried about what happens if something gets out. The guard on my left was holding the polymer transfer brace on my wrists. He was a big Keth-Vor, gray-brown scales, the kind of heavy build they get when they've been in ground forces long enough. He hadn't said a single word to me the entire walk. Now he said something to the other guard in their language. I don't speak Keth-Vor, but I've been around it enough to catch tone, and the other one made a short, sharp sound that I think was either a laugh or a dismissal. They stopped in front of Unit D. The outer door opened, then a short corridor, maybe 4 meters, with the inner door at the end. The processing drone scanned something. The inner door released. The guard walked me in, removed the wrist brace, stepped out. The doors sealed behind me in sequence, outer last, with that same slow exhale sound. I stood there for a moment in the new space and let my eyes adjust. It was bigger than the holding cell, the same amber floor lighting but slightly warmer in tone. There was a sleeping slab on each side. The cell was designed for 2, apparently, and a small shared utility space at the far end. Water waste, a heating unit set to some middle ground temperature that was probably meant to accommodate a range of species. There was someone already in the cell. He was sitting on the left-hand sleeping slab with his back against the wall and his knees drawn up loosely, reading something on a thin data pad. He didn't look up when I came in. He looked like he'd made a decision about looking up and had decided against it. My first thought was human. My second thought, almost immediately, not quite. He had the right shape for it. 2 arms, 2 legs, upright posture, the general bilateral symmetry. Height that would have been normal on Earth, maybe 6 feet, lean build. Dark hair, cut short on the sides and longer on top in a way that looked less like a style choice and more like it had just stopped being attended to. Skin that was, and this is the part where my brain did a little recalibration, genuinely, uniformly pale. Not sick pale. Not the kind of pale you get from vitamin deficiency or too much time indoors. An older kind of pale, like marble. Like something that had decided on a particular color a long time ago and committed to it. I noticed his hands on the data pad. Long fingers, knuckles that looked like they had some history, and the nails slightly longer than standard, very slightly, just enough that your eye caught it and wondered. Then he looked up. His eyes were dark, not in a standard way. They had depth in a way that made the space behind them feel much larger than the space in front. He looked at me with an expression that was calibrated and careful, the kind of look that's measured out precisely because the person doing it is very aware that how they look at you in the first moment matters. He said in perfect, slightly formal, clearly practiced English, "You're human." "Last I checked," I said. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Then he looked back at his data pad. "Sit where you like," he said. "The right slab is warmer. The utility heat doesn't distribute evenly." I stood there for another second. Then I walked to the right slab and sat down. His name, I would learn later that evening, was Aldrich. I should explain, and I realize this is the part where people who weren't there start to look skeptical. What a vampire was doing in a Keth-Vor military installation on a moon in the outer compact. The short answer is the same thing I was doing there, being detained. The longer answer requires a bit of context about the way the Galactic Compact handles what they diplomatically call legacy biological entities, which is bureaucratic language for species that predate current galactic civilization in ways that don't fit neatly into anyone's taxonomy. There are more of these than you'd think. The Compact maintains a registry of 47 recognized legacy designations, and most of them are treated with a specific combination of formal acknowledgement and careful, cautious distance. Vampires properly, the V. Hallier, are designation number 3 on that registry. They don't talk about what number 1 and 2 are. I've asked. Nobody answers. The V. Hallier are old. Genuinely, cosmically old, in the way that makes the word old feel inadequate. The current working theory among human xenobiologists is that they predate the development of interstellar travel by something in the range of 60,000 years. They've watched civilizations rise and collapse. They've made alliances and broken them across timescales that make recorded human history look like a Tuesday afternoon. There are maybe 12,000 of them left, give or take, since census taking with a species that can go undetected for decades at a time is difficult. Scattered across the inhabited galaxy in ones and twos, mostly unaffiliated, mostly operating according to their own long-view logic that rarely intersects with what the rest of us are doing. The Keth Vor had captured Aldrich 6 weeks before they captured me. He hadn't told them what he was. He'd been moving through Selenide 4 space on a private transit vessel, for what purpose he declined to specify in our early conversations. When the Keth Vor intercepted him during a routine enforcement sweep that was about as routine as a military blockade ever is. He'd presented false credentials. They'd flagged him as a coalition-adjacent asset, which wasn't exactly wrong. And they'd stuck him in the quiet wing because the initial biological scan had come back with readings that confused everyone involved. He'd been there 6 weeks. I'd been there 6 hours. The first conversation was careful. We were both doing the thing you do when you're a prisoner sharing space with a stranger, measuring, cataloging, deciding what to show and what to keep. It's a careful economy. You give a little, you see what comes back. I told him I was Coalition Infantry, 3rd Detachment, that I'd been captured during an operation I didn't detail. He didn't press on the details. He offered his name and described himself as a private traveler with unfortunate timing. I didn't press either. What he did do, and this was the moment I started to understand what kind of person, or near person, I was dealing with, was ask me about my hand. My left hand, the one that had been in the polymer brace. I'd been flexing it since I sat down, trying to get circulation back, and I was pretty sure the feeling wasn't coming back completely because something in the nerve or tendon wasn't happy. "You're favoring it," he said. He hadn't looked up from the datapad. "Brace was too tight," I said. "I'll work it out." He set the datapad down. He looked at my hand with an attention that was clinical isn't quite the right word. Careful, precise, like someone reading a text they've seen before. "May I?" he said. Not quite a question, not quite permission-seeking. More like an offer with formal packaging. I looked at him, then I held out my hand. He took it with both of his, cool, which I'd expected, with a careful grip that managed to be firm without adding any pressure to the damaged area, and he pressed 2 fingers to specific points along the inside of my wrist, held them there, then moved methodically along the base of my palm. "Ulnar nerve compression," he said. "From the brace placement, it's minor. Sensation should return in 20 to 40 minutes. In the meantime," and he adjusted his hold, applied gentle counterpressure to 2 specific points, and held for about 30 seconds. The tingling that came back wasn't comfortable, but the numbness started to recede. "How do you know that?" I asked. He released my hand, picked up his datapad again. "I've had a long time to learn things," he said. Day 2. The food situation in the quiet wing was manageable if you adjusted your expectations significantly downward. The Keth Vor pushed nutrient blocks through a slot in the outer door twice daily. They were calibrated for Keth Vor biology, which meant they were dense, fibrous, and tasted like someone had made food out of cardboard and then asked cardboard what it thought of the experience. I ate them. You eat what's in front of you. Aldrich didn't eat his. He'd pushed the blocks to one side on day 1 and left them. On day 2, he moved them to the access slot and pushed them back out. I watched this happen and waited. "You don't eat," I said. "Not this," he said. "What do you eat?" He looked at me, the careful look measuring. "I suspect you already have a hypothesis," he said. "I suspect I do. Does it concern you?" I thought about that honestly. Did it concern me? I was in a Keth Vor prison. The cell had walls that could probably stop a plasma round. I was 600 meters below a salt flat on a moon I'd never planned to visit. The person sharing my cell had fingers slightly too long, eyes slightly too deep, and apparently hadn't eaten in 6 weeks that I knew of and looked fine. A little, I said, honestly. That's a reasonable answer, he said. I appreciate that. Are you going to be a problem? He considered this with a gravity that I think most people would have found unsettling. He gave it genuine thought. No, he said finally. I've lived a long time by not being a problem when the situation doesn't require it. And you're not, this is not a situation that requires it. And if you get hungry enough that the situation changes, then I'll tell you, he said simply, in advance, and we'll discuss it. I sat with that. It was more straightforward than I'd expected, more honest. Most of the things I'd been afraid might happen had involved something more sudden and less communicative. All right, I said. He nodded, then went back to his datapad. That was day 2. Day 4. Something was happening with the guards. I'd spent the first few days mapping the pattern. How often they cycled, what the check-in intervals were, whether any of them deviated from standard spacing. It's what you do, you watch, you build a picture. On day 4, the check-in pattern changed. Usually there were 2 guards running the quiet wing rotation. One would pass the outer door, peer through the observation slot, log something on a handheld, move on. Every 4 hours, reliable as a clock. On day 4, there was a 3rd person in the rotation, and this one didn't just pass the cell. This one stopped and stayed. I noticed it because I was facing the right direction when it happened. The observation slot on our outer door was a small rectangular aperture at about head height. Most of the time when the guards checked in, they took maybe 5 seconds, look, log, leave. This one stood there for maybe 45 seconds, looking in. I looked back. He was Keth Vor. Younger than the usual rotation guards, or at least with a younger quality, the scales lighter in color, the build less settled. He wore a different rank designation on his collar. Not ground forces. Something administrative or intelligence adjacent from what I'd learned of their insignia. He was looking at Aldrich. Aldrich was reading. He hadn't moved, but I watched his shoulders do a thing, a very small, controlled stillness, the way a person goes still when they're aware of being watched and are choosing not to react to it. The guard left. Intelligence, Aldrich said without looking up. They've been trying to determine what I am. The scan came back strange, I said. The scan came back impossible, he said, by their metrics, which is creating organizational discomfort. Will they figure it out? He turned a page on the datapad. They'll find a record eventually, compact registry, if someone thinks to look there rather than in military species databases. He paused. It will complicate things. For you. For them, he said. V. Hallier detainment is a diplomatic incident under compact law. They'll have to either release me or invoke an emergency designation protocol, which requires sign-off from 3 separate governing bodies and takes approximately 8 months. So they're stuck with you. Or I'm stuck with them. He tilted his head slightly. The language matters less than the timeline. I lay back on my slab and stared at the ceiling. They put me in here with you on purpose, I said. To watch the interaction. A pause. Yes, he said, probably. They wanted to see how a human would react to a V. Hallier in confined conditions. That would be my assessment. That's kind of insulting. Which part? The part where they thought I'd be a useful test subject without telling me I was a test subject. He made a sound, low, brief. It took me a moment to realize it was a laugh, not performed, something real, a little surprised. Yes, he said, that part is somewhat insulting. Day 6. I woke up to find Aldrich standing in the center of the cell. Just standing. In the dark, the floor lights dimmed on a cycle, and somewhere around what I decided to call 3 a.m. they went very low, almost off. He was standing in that near dark in the center of the cell with his arms loosely at his sides and his eyes open, and his expression, I couldn't fully read it. Not blank. Not sleeping standing up, if that was even a thing. Something else. Something like listening. I lay still and watched him for a while through almost closed eyes. After maybe 10 minutes, he said, without turning, "You're awake." "Yeah," I said. He turned then, walked back to his slab and sat down. "What were you doing?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Listening to the facility," he said. "The structure. Rock carries information if you're patient enough. Movement in adjacent corridors, mechanical changes, pressure shifts in the ventilation." "What's happening?" He looked at me, the careful look again. But different, there was something underneath it now, something that had decided. "3 things," he said. "First, there's been increased movement in the wing adjacent to this one for the past 2 nights. Pattern, not random. They're preparing something. Second, the atmospheric pressure in our ventilation feed shifted 8 hours ago, which means they've reconfigured the air management for this block specifically. Third." He paused. "Third," he said, "I heard them bring in additional restraint equipment 4 cells down." I sat up. "Interrogation?" I asked. "Reassignment preparation," he said, "at minimum." I looked at the cell door, the layered composite panels, the secondary lock corridor. "How long?" I asked. "Based on the pattern," he said, "I'd estimate within the next 48 hours something significant changes for one or both of us." I sat in the dark for a moment with that. "What do you want to do?" I asked. He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, something in his expression shifted substantially. The careful calibration dropped just slightly. What was underneath was old and tired and very, very precise. "I've been in this cell for 6 weeks," he said. "I'd like to leave it." "Okay," I said. "You're remarkably unfazed," he said. "I'm infantry," I said. "Unfazed is basically the job description." Another sound, that almost laugh again, low and real. "All right, Sergeant," he said. "Let me tell you what I've been thinking." We talked for most of what remained of that night. I want to say up front that the plan we came up with was not the plan I would have come up with alone. It was not the plan he would have come up with alone either, I think. Not because he lacked capability, but because some of the components required a specific understanding of Keth Vor military psychology that I had and he didn't, and some components required capabilities that I didn't have and he did. It was a joint operation, which felt in some ways more significant than the operation itself. Here's what I'd learned in 6 days of watching the Quiet Wings operational pattern. The morning check-in was the shortest. Guards were coming off a long rotation, running on efficiency, minimum engagement. The food delivery slot required a brief mechanical unlock of the outer door that created a 3-second window where the secondary lock was partially disengaged. The processing drone that made twice daily rounds along the wing had a sensor array pointed forward and down, which meant it had a blind zone approximately 1 meter above head height. And the guard who'd been watching Aldrich, the intelligence-adjacent one, had been coming by outside of the standard rotation, erratically, which meant he was operating independently of the standard guard schedule, and independent operations create gaps. Here's what Aldrich contributed to the operational picture. He could hear things I couldn't, not metaphorically, literally. His hearing extended into frequency ranges that meant he had intelligence on adjacent cell activity, guard conversations in the outer corridors, and mechanical system patterns that I'd had no access to. He'd also, in 6 weeks, developed a detailed understanding of exactly how long it took the secondary lock to fully cycle after the food slot opened. 4.3 seconds, not 3, 4.3. The 1 extra second mattered. He also, and this was the part I'd had to sit with, was fast. Genuinely, non-humanly fast, in the way that the compact registry entries on VHALIR describe as somatically enhanced beyond standard biological parameters, which is scientific language for if you need something moved very quickly, this is your person. The door, I said, what can you actually do with it? He considered. The inner door is the constraint, he said. The composite layering is designed for VHALIR adjacent force levels. Interestingly enough, they did their research at some point. The outer door is standard. If the secondary lock disengages even partially, we can exploit the cycle gap, I said, combined with the right timing on the food delivery. Which you'll hear coming. Which I'll hear coming, he confirmed. I thought about it. The cameras in the outer corridor, I said. 2, he said. Fixed mount. The angle, he paused, thinking. If we move along the wall to the left of the outer door rather than directly through the corridor, we're outside both coverage arcs for approximately 11 seconds. 11 seconds. Is that enough? I thought about Keth-Vor military response times, about the distance from the guard station to our position based on the sound patterns I'd mapped. Maybe, I said. That's not a no, he said. It's not, I agreed. Day 7. The intelligence-adjacent guard came back, but this time he brought someone with him. The second figure was taller, older, wore the kind of collar insignia that takes a long time to earn. He stood at the observation slot and looked in at Aldrich the way you look at something you've read about and are now seeing in person for the first time. A mixture of recognition and something more complicated underneath. Aldrich didn't look up. I watched the two of them from my peripheral vision. The senior officer said something to the younger one, clipped, authoritative. The younger one responded. Then the senior officer looked directly at me. He said something in Keth-Vor. He's asking why you're calm, Aldrich said quietly, not moving his eyes from the datapad. Tell him it's a lifestyle choice, I said. Aldrich made the almost laugh sound. Then he said something in Keth-Vor, fluid, natural, which surprised me more than it probably should have, and the senior officer's expression shifted into something I couldn't parse. What did you actually say? I asked after they'd left. Something closer to, she was raised in a tradition that prizes equanimity under observation. He tilted his head, which is near enough to accurate. You speak Keth-Vor. I speak most things, he said simply. How many languages? He thought about it, genuinely calculated. 43 living languages, he said, 17 dead ones, and dialects complicate the count considerably. I stared at the ceiling. You've been in here 6 weeks, I said. Why haven't you just talked your way out? He was quiet for a moment. Because the compact registry entry that will eventually surface requires my silence on certain topics, he said. If I speak to them in detail, I reveal things that, he paused, choosing words with care. There are agreements older than this conflict that take precedence. If I invoke them, I also expose them. And some things are better kept quiet even at personal cost. I sat with that. There was something in it that I recognized. The shape of it was familiar, the experience of knowing something you can't say, holding it even when the holding is expensive. Okay, I said. He looked at me. You're not going to push, he asked. Your business, I said, not mine. Another look, something different in it, not the careful calibration, something more like genuine consideration. Like he was revising an estimate. Most people push, he said. Most people aren't in a Keth-Vor prison trying to figure out how to leave it, I said. I have different priorities right now. The almost laugh, warmer this time. Fair enough, Sergeant, he said. Day 8. The movement in the adjacent wing intensified. Aldrich heard it first, obviously, and described it to me in enough detail that I could build a picture. What they were doing in that wing didn't sound like routine operation. It sounded like preparation, equipment being positioned, protocols being followed that weren't part of standard detention management. They've received instructions from somewhere above this installation, Aldrich said. In the deep dark hours, sitting cross-legged on his slab with the datapad off. Someone up the chain has made a decision. Transfer. Or something more immediate. I looked at him. How immediate? Tomorrow's food cycle, he said. Possibly the first one, possibly the second. I thought about the plan. The 4.3 seconds, the 11-second camera gap, the components we'd been assembling in quiet pieces over the past 2 days. Are you ready? I asked. He looked at me with those deep, dark eyes in the ambient glow of the floor strips, and for a long moment said nothing. There's one thing I should tell you, he said, before we do this. Tell me. I've made arrangements in this facility over the past 6 weeks that you don't know about, he said carefully. Small ones. I want to be honest that they exist without detailing them, because I believe honesty in partnership is. He seemed briefly uncertain, which was unexpected to see on his face. Old habits sometimes include being direct about one's advantages. I looked at him. Are these arrangements going to help us? I asked. Yes. Are they going to hurt anyone who doesn't have it coming? He considered, no. Then we're fine, I said. He tilted his head, that genuine surprise quality again. You trust me, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I trust that you've had 6 weeks to do whatever you were going to do and you're still in this cell, I said. Which tells me the thing holding you here is the thing you told me about. The old agreements. And that you've decided, I thought about how to say it, that you've decided I'm a reason to move. He was quiet. Yes, he said finally, that's accurate. Then we move on the first food cycle tomorrow, I said. Whatever you've arranged, I assume it'll become clear when we need it. It will, he said. Good night, Aldrich. Good night, Sergeant. The first food cycle on day 9 came at what I estimated was approximately 6:40 in the morning, measured by the lighting cycle restoring to full amber, and the faint change in ventilation pressure that Aldrich had taught me to notice. I was already up. I'd been up for 2 hours, running the plan in careful loops, checking for gaps. Aldrich was standing, not the centered listening stance from a few nights ago, something different. Alert, coiled. He had the datapad in his hands, but he wasn't reading it. He was listening to the corridor. 2 minutes, he said quietly. I moved to the position we'd agreed on. Inside the door, left side, tight against the wall where the camera blind zone started. There's a third guard today, he said. Outside of Pattern, the intelligence officer, he's, a pause. He's come to watch whatever they've planned. Does that change anything? It adds a witness, he said, which I've decided is actually useful. He didn't explain that. I filed it for later. 90 seconds, he said. I breathed slow, the way you breathe before any operation. Not deep, not dramatic, just slow and steady. The kind of breathing that takes the edge off the adrenaline enough to think. 45. The faint sound of the delivery cart. I could just barely hear it. 20. I got my weight on my front foot. 10. The outer lock clicked. Now, Aldrich said and moved. End of part 1. Part 2. Here's something I've tried to explain to the debrief officers and the coalition intelligence analysts and the 3 different journalists who have asked me about it since. Being fast is different from being V. Hallier fast. Being fast, human fast, trained operator fast, the kind of fast you develop after years of drills and reflex conditioning, is a product of preparation meeting instinct. You've done the motion so many times that the body stops asking the brain for permission. The signal chain shortens. The gap between stimulus and response compresses to something that would have seemed impossible to you at age 12. V. Haller fast is something else. It's not that he moved before I could track it exactly. It's that when he moved, something about the way time felt in the room shifted slightly, like a film running at a frame rate slightly higher than you're used to. You could see him, he was there, he was a body moving through space, but the interval between his starting position and his ending position was wrong. It was too short. Physics didn't seem to have been properly consulted. When the outer lock clicked, and the food slot mechanism began its 4.3-second partial disengagement cycle, Aldrich was at the outer door before I had completed my first step. He didn't hit the door. He didn't throw himself at it. He placed his hands on it with specific, calculated pressure. I saw it clearly at 2 points, and there was a sound like something under enormous stress deciding to give, and the outer door opened. Not broken, not damaged, opened, like it had been convinced. The secondary lock, partially disengaged from the food slot cycle, released completely in the pressure differential. The door swung outward into the access corridor. 4.3 seconds. We were through in 2.5. The outer corridor was amber-lit and empty. Empty for 11 seconds anyway. Aldrich went left along the wall without me having to signal the direction. We'd agreed, and I followed with my back to the same wall, moving fast and low. The camera blind zone was exactly where he'd mapped it. We passed through it in a sliding motion that would have looked, from any angle that could actually see us, like two people trying very hard not to exist. The corridor branched. Aldrich stopped at the branch point, held up one hand, listened. I counted seconds. At 8 he moved right, fast. I matched him. The corridor opened into a wider service passage, rock-walled, rougher, the amber lights replaced here by bare functional white strips. This was infrastructure space, the bones of the installation, not the dressed-out detention sections. Here, he said, and stopped at a section of wall. I looked at the wall. It looked like a wall. He pressed one hand flat against a specific section of the rock surface, not the carved installation wall, the raw stone, and applied pressure at a specific point. Something gave. Not dramatically, not violently. A seam that hadn't been visible separated, and a panel roughly the size of a large cabinet swung inward on a gravity hinge. Behind it was a crawl space that led somewhere. 6 weeks, I said. 6 weeks, he confirmed. What is that, carved out by hand? The rock here is salt mineral composite, he said, reasonably workable, and I am patient. I stared at him. Then I got down and went through the panel first. The crawl space opened into a natural void in the rock, a cavity left by geological history, irregular shaped, maybe 3 meters across at the widest. Cold. Dark except for the faint luminescence of a mineral stripe, running along one wall that Aldrich had apparently decided was sufficient. He came through behind me and pulled the panel closed. In the dark, his pale skin caught the mineral light and turned it into something that looked almost incandescent. His eyes had changed. In the lower light they were different, slightly luminescent themselves, which was a thing I catalogued and decided not to overthink at this specific moment. Where does this go? I asked. Up, he said. 2 levels. There's a ventilation maintenance access point that connects to a service shaft that connects to the exterior atmospheric management array. The array on the surface, adjacent to the main installation entry. On the eastern perimeter. I thought about the geography of the salt flats. The installation entry would be marked. The eastern perimeter would be less monitored than the main approach, but not unmonitored. Kethvor on the surface. A patrol rotation, he said. I've listened to it for 6 weeks. Every 92 minutes we'll need to time it. What's the current interval? He looked at me. In that faint phosphorescent light with those changed eyes, for the first time since I'd met him, he looked genuinely ancient. Not old the way people look old. Old the way stone looks old. 47 minutes since last cycle, he said. So we have 45 minutes. 44 now. I looked at the upward passage, natural and narrow and long. Then we shouldn't talk, I said. No, he agreed. We went up. The thing about climbing through a natural rock cavity that was not designed to be climbed through by anything is that it requires a specific combination of patience and controlled violence. You're pushing your body through gaps it doesn't fit through, finding footholds in surfaces that didn't ask to be used as footholds, and doing all of it quietly, because silence is the only thing standing between you and a facility full of armed Kethvor who are about to realize their two most interesting prisoners have left. I'm in good shape. I've been in the infantry long enough that my body does what I ask it to, within reason, without too much complaint. Aldrich went up that passage like gravity was a mild suggestion. He wasn't showing off, I want to be clear about that. He matched my pace, stayed close enough that he could help if I needed it, made no comment on the difference in our progress rates. But watching him move through that space was like watching something done correctly by something that was built for it, even though the space hadn't been built for him either. He just adapted, instantly, fluidly. Each hand and foot placement was exactly right on the first attempt. Halfway up I slipped. The left foot, a flake of salt rock gave under my boot, suddenly, without warning, and for a half-second I was falling backward into a gap that led to approximately 8 meters of empty air. His hand closed on my wrist. Not roughly, precisely. One hand on my wrist, one bracing against the rock wall, and I was arrested before I'd fallen more than 20 centimeters. He held me there completely still while I found new footing. Thank you, I said quietly. Keep moving, he said, quiet, matter of fact, not making it larger than it was. I kept moving. The ventilation maintenance access was a hatch set into the upper rock, metal framed, secured with a standard Kethvor maintenance lock that Aldrich addressed with a small piece of equipment he produced from somewhere I didn't see. The hatch opened. Cold, salt, flat air hit me in the face like a clean slap. Outside air. After 9 days underground, it was the most present thing in the world. We came up through the hatch in sequence, me first, he followed, closed it behind him and crouched behind the atmospheric management array housing. It was a large industrial unit, covered in intake vents and heat exchange fins, about the size of a ground vehicle. Good cover. The salt flats were early morning pale. The sky above Selenite 4 was the color of tarnished copper where the moon's thin atmosphere caught the distant sun. No wind. The salt crunched faintly under my boots when I shifted weight. I looked east. The installation perimeter ran along a defined edge where the rock plateau met the flatter ground. The main entry was north of us, clearly marked. Between us and any viable extraction point was about 300 meters of open salt flat, which would be very pleasant to cross if not for the patrol rotation due in approximately 28 minutes. I started doing calculations. Coalition position, Aldrich said. If my detachment followed standard protocol after my capture, I said slowly, thinking, there should be a holding point in the basin east of the flats, approximately 4 kilometers. Can you signal them from here? I'd been stripped of all equipment in intake, no comm unit, no signaling device, nothing. Not with what I have, I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he produced, again from somewhere I genuinely couldn't identify, his clothing was not that voluminous, a small device. Slim, dark metal. Not Kethvor, not exactly human either, something older. This sends on frequencies that most modern detection arrays aren't calibrated to monitor, he said, because most modern detection arrays were designed after those frequencies went largely out of use. I looked at it. Coalition frequencies? I asked. No, he said, but there are receivers in Coalition field equipment that respond to it. Legacy hardware. older than current standard. Most field units still carry them because the component is cheap and nobody got around to removing it. I looked at him. You've made contact with coalition forces before, I said. Not your specific forces, he said carefully, but the hardware is consistent. You're going to have to give me a lot more context at some point, I said. There's time for that later, he said, 26 minutes. I took the device. He showed me the activation sequence, 3 presses, pause, 2 presses, hold. Simple enough. I did it. The device made no sound, no visible light, nothing that I could detect. Will they respond? I asked. If they're within 20 kilometers and their receivers are active, he said, yes. And if they're not? Then we walk 4 kilometers in 25 minutes across an open salt flat. I've done worse, I said. I don't doubt it, he said. We waited. In the shadow of the atmospheric array, crouched in the cold salt air, watching the perimeter. The sky lightened by fractions. Somewhere below us, I knew, the facility was beginning to register our absence. The morning would be getting complicated for someone. I thought about what the senior officer's face would look like. I thought about the intelligence-adjacent guard who'd come to watch, who Aldrich had said would be a useful witness. The witness, I said quietly, what did you mean last night? Aldrich was watching the eastern horizon with those changed eyes. In daylight they looked almost normal. Almost. There are 17 articles in the Compact Treaty that govern V-Hallier interaction with member species, he said. Article 7 is the relevant one. It states that any V-Hallier detained by a Compact member without proper registry invocation and Article 7 notification to the Compact Council is in violation of a very old agreement. The penalty structure is severe. They didn't invoke Article 7, I said. They didn't know what I was until recently. And when they suspected, they chose not to formalize it because formalization would require them to release me or trigger a months-long process that would involve 3 governing bodies. So they sat on it. They sat on it, he confirmed. Which means every day I was in that cell after they suspected what I was, they were accumulating a violation record. He paused. The intelligence officer knows this. He's been aware of it for at least 4 days, based on what I've heard in the corridor. He's there today because he wants to see the resolution of the situation before he decides whether to document what he knows. I thought about this. So if we escape, I said, he documents it, and the Keth Vor installation gets hit with an Article 7 violation, which carries political consequences significant enough, Aldrich said, to substantially complicate their current operational objectives in this sector. You planned this, I said. He was quiet for a moment. I identified an opportunity, he said carefully, and waited for the right catalyst. I looked at him. I was the catalyst, I said. You were the catalyst that gave the situation a timeline, he said. When they moved you to my cell, I understood that something was changing in their calculus, and that I needed to act before that change resolved in a direction I couldn't influence. I sat with that for a second. You could have gotten out earlier, I said. Without me. Perhaps, he said, eventually, but the crawl space required timing I hadn't achieved yet, and he stopped, started again. When they put you in that cell, I made a decision that it was better to do this together. Why? He was quiet for a long time, the copper-tinted sky brightened by another fraction. Because 60,000 years of watching things happen from a distance produces a specific kind of weariness, he said finally. And occasionally, you make a decision to be in the situation rather than above it. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything, which felt right. The signal came back in 14 minutes. Not through the device had no receiver, it was transmit-only. The response came across the salt flat in the form of a light. 3 flashes, low to the ground, east-northeast, Coalition Standard Confirmation Code. I pressed my hand to my mouth for a second, just a second. Then I looked at Aldrich. "They're there," I said. "I see them," he said. His eyes were tracking something on the horizon I couldn't resolve at this distance. 17 minutes until patrol cycle, I said. 300 meters of open ground. There's a drainage channel, he said, 20 meters to our left, runs northeast. Shallow, but it provides approximately 80 centimeters of concealment from the perimeter line. I looked. There it was, a depression in the flat, subtle, exactly what he described. "You've been planning the surface approach for 6 weeks too," I said. "Every detail I could observe through the ventilation acoustic data," he said. "It's approximate. But good enough." "I believe so." I looked at the perimeter one more time. Clear. "Move," I said. We moved. The drainage channel was cold and salt-crusted and approximately as comfortable as lying in a gravel driveway. We covered the first 150 meters in it at a crawl, fast but controlled, elbows and knees, keeping the profile below the natural ground level. At the point where the channel shallowed and lost its concealment value, we stopped. The next 150 meters was open. Not completely, there were irregular formations of salt rock, low and scattered, that broke the sight line somewhat, but there was no clean covered route. We'd have to move between rocks and use whatever the terrain offered. "I'll go first," I said. "I can move fast enough." "No," he said. "I'll draw observation if they're looking this direction. You follow at 10-second intervals." I looked at him, thought about arguing, didn't. 10 seconds, I said. He came out of the channel and moved. I watched the perimeter. Nothing moved. No alert, no alarm. I counted to 10. I followed. We moved between the salt formations in alternating rushes. The ground crunched and I kept my steps as light as I could, harder in boots than in softer footwear, but manageable. The eastern horizon was close now. 200 meters, 150, 100. Aldrich stopped behind a formation and held up a fist. I froze. From the north, far away, maybe 200 meters along the perimeter, a sound. The mechanical rhythm of a Keth-Vor patrol drone, not their cycle. Early. Something had triggered an early sweep. We held. The drone moved along the perimeter from north to south. Its sensor array was forward-facing, like the internal processing drone. Side angle would catch us if we were in motion. Stopped, low, against the salt rock, marginal, maybe 50%. Neither of us moved. The drone passed our latitude. It continued south. Neither of us moved for another 20 seconds. Then Aldrich looked at me, a very slight nod. We covered the last 100 meters in 45 seconds. The Coalition Advance Unit materialized out of a terrain depression about 30 meters from the eastern edge of the flat. 4 of them. Body armor, Coalition standard markings. The one in front had lieutenant's insignia. Not Harrow, someone from a different unit. "Staff Sergeant Voss," the lieutenant said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something tight in it. The kind of tight that comes from relief you haven't let yourself feel yet. "Yeah," I said. "Who's asking?" "2nd Advance, 16th Detachment. We picked up your signal. We've been running observation on this installation for 6 days. She looked at Aldrich. Her expression went through several things in rapid sequence. "And your companion is?" "Aldrich," he said before she could finish. "Private traveler." "Unfortunate timing. I believe we share an interest in moving away from this facility quickly." The lieutenant looked at him for another second, then at me. "Is he?" "He's fine," I said. "He's with me." She made a decision. I watched it happen, the rapid calculation, the conclusion, the commitment. "Move," she said. "Double time. We have a transport 3 kilometers east." We ran. Across the rough ground east of the salt flats, scrub rock and low mineral outcroppings, ground that fought you with every step. I ran because I'm trained to run. The 4 coalition soldiers ran because they were trained to run. And Aldrich ran beside us with that same quality of motion I'd seen in the crawl space, adapting instantly, perfectly, no wasted energy, no stumbled steps. He ran like the ground was a mild inconvenience he decided to accommodate. Behind us, roughly 3 minutes into the run, we heard the installation's alert system begin. Not the close, sharp alert of guards in the corridor. The broader, deeper alarm of a facility that had registered an external breach. They'd found the open hatch. "How close is the transport?" I asked between strides. 2.5 kilometers, the lieutenant said. "Then we don't slow down," I said. She glanced at me. "Were you planning to?" she asked. "No." We didn't slow down. The transport was a coalition scout vehicle, low profile, dark painted, 6-wheeled, the kind of thing designed to exist in difficult terrain without being seen from altitude. It had a crew of 2 who already had the engine running. They didn't ask questions, they drove. I got in the back. Aldrich sat beside me. The 4 soldiers arranged themselves around the vehicle perimeter. The lieutenant sat up front. We were moving within 90 seconds of reaching the vehicle. The salt flats fell behind us. The copper sky overhead was brightening toward something more honest as the moon's slow rotation brought the sun's angle up. The installation was somewhere behind us in the rock, dealing with whatever it was dealing with. I sat in the vibrating chassis of the transport and felt the specific quality of being outside, being out. After 9 days underground, the sky through the vehicle's narrow vision strips felt enormous. I looked at Aldrich. He was sitting still, hands in his lap. His eyes were back to their regular appearance, the depth without the luminescence, the darkness without the glow. He was looking at the floor of the transport with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. "You all right?" I asked. He looked up, that careful calibration again, but different, softer around the edges. "Yes," he said. He seemed to search for the right word. "I'm quite all right." I nodded. "The arrangement you mentioned," I said. "The things you did in the facility, what happens with those now?" "The intelligence officer will document the Article 7 violation," he said. "It will reach the Compact Council within the week. The diplomatic pressure on the Keth Vor installation will create leverage that," he paused, "that benefits coalition operational interests in this sector, not as the primary purpose, but as an outcome. So we both got something out of it." "We both got out of it," he said. "Which was the primary thing?" I thought about the 12,000 V-Hallier scattered across the galaxy, each one carrying a weight of history so old it bent under its own gravity. I thought about 60,000 years of watching from a distance, about the decision to be in the situation rather than above it. "For what it's worth," I said, "you were good to be in a cell with." He looked at me. Something in his face shifted, genuinely shifted, not the careful calibration but something underneath it, something that might have been moved. "You as well, Sergeant," he said. The debrief took 11 days. Coalition intelligence wanted every detail about the quiet wing layout, the patrol patterns, the guard rotation, the atmospheric management system. I gave them everything I had, which was considerable. What they were less interested in and more cautious about was the component involving Aldrich, the compact implications, the Article 7 angle. I told them anyway, told them clearly, put it in writing in the official debrief record so there was no ambiguity about what had happened and what the outcome of it would be. 3 of the debrief officers were from the intelligence division. They asked me about Aldrich specifically, what he'd said, what his stated purpose was, what his capabilities appeared to be, what I thought his actual objectives were. I told them what I knew, which was less than they wanted, but more than they'd expected. "Would you characterize him as an ally? one of the intelligence officers asked. I thought about it. I'd characterize him as someone who made a decision, I said, to do something together instead of alone, after 60,000 years of alone. The intelligence officer looked at me. Is that supposed to mean something specific? He asked. I think it means, I said, that whoever put me in that cell with him made a bigger mistake than they realized, but not for the reasons they'd expect. I got a message 6 weeks after the debrief. Not Coalition comm system, not any official channel. It arrived through a frequency that the technician who found it in my equipment told me was, and I'm quoting his exact words, not assigned to any recognized communication protocol in current use. The message was brief, 12 words. I'm not going to reproduce all 12 of them here, partly because some of them were in a language I've since learned is Old V Hallier and only translates approximately, and partly because some things belong to the exchange that made them. But the last 3 words translated easily. They were in plain English. Be well, Sergeant.